Hi, this is Street Life, and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of Casino Royale. As a kid growing up, some of the adults around me, the guys in particular, were fans of the James Bond movies. This would be the films from like the 70s and 80s. And then as a kid, I was alive during the time that Pierce Brosnan was James Bond. And I remember watching these movies, liking the slickness of it, or for lack of a better term, how he dressed nicely, went to cool locations, but I didn't think the movies were particularly good. And from the James Bond movies that I then saw from the adults around me, I didn't really like those either. This would have been like the Roger Moore, Sean Connery James Bond movies. And granted, mostly what I saw was just bits and pieces, but I remember really not liking them as a kid. Granted, this was being a kid. These movies were from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I probably just didn't have the patience at the time for those movies. But I do remember not liking the visual appearance of them. I seem to remember them having like a yellowish tint to them, which is something that I think just some movies of the time had during that period. But when Daniel Craig was announced as the new James Bond, I don't think I was previously aware of him. But for whatever reason, when the movie came out, I was a bit older at that time. And I remember seeing the trailers, and they had all of these Sony gadgets and electronics, like this cool laptop. And, this was during the time of Sony Vaio. And you had these cool matching gadgets, accessories, computers that looked really sleek and nice. I thought it was pretty cool. And based on that and the trailers, I decided that I wanted to see this James Bond movie. And I want to say this was one of those movies that I actually went to theaters to see. This was during the time when I was still pretty young, going to the movies quite frequently. And I remember going to the movie theater, seeing James Bond with Daniel Craig and really liking it. I liked the story, the glitz, the glamour. I just really remember enjoying the movie. And in the years since, it's now become one of those films that I watch every so often. I would go as far as to say that with regards to action movies, and probably movies in general, I'd now rank it amongst my favorite movies. It's probably my top 10. The movie doesn't have a super complex storyline or anything like that. There's not a lot of depth and analysis, but it's a solid, enjoyable movie. I would say that, granted, this is with the caveat that I'm kind of biased against the other James Bond films, right? But part of it could be that I was older when during the period that Daniel Craig was James Bond, but he's my favorite James Bond. And Casino Royale is definitely my favorite. Now, that opinion only holds so much weight because this is really the only James Bond movie that I've seen in its entirety. Bits and pieces of the Pierce Brosnan ones, some of the earlier Connery and Roger Moore movies, but his was the only series that I really saw in completion. And so, from the very beginning, Casino Royale starts off with a bang, with probably one of the greatest opening sequences, where here you have Bond, he's in a foreign location, he's trying to hunt down this bomb maker, working with a partner with the team, and his partner is seen by the bomb maker, which then leads to this incredible foot race between him and the bomb maker, between James Bond and the bomb maker, where, they're jumping, they're running, it's very acrobatic, it's some Cirque du Soleil type stuff, where it's Bond is running after him, giving chase, the guy's jumping, he's slipping, he's flipping, he's leaping from this to that and whatnot. It's an incredible chase, right? It's a very different and creative take on your typical foot race, which we see in movies, but it's the way that it happens is very different and very refreshing. I think back to seeing that for the first time, where it's within just a few minutes of the film opening, you start off with this very laid back black and white scene where James finds this double agent and whatnot. The typical James Bond intro where you have the theme song, a big deal is made about the opening graphics and all this kind of stuff. But what really set the movie off for me was just these few minutes after the opening credits, where you have James chasing this guy, and it's like just this incredibly exciting foot race, which just gets you amped up for the movie and the story that's to come. It really set the stage. It set you up with the promise that this is going to be an exciting movie. And from there, one of the things that I love about James Bond on the whole, right? Like, I like police procedurals. I like investigative movies, detective films, espionage, where you're on the hunt, you're putting together clues and things like that. But what I find I like with spy films versus police procedurals is that police procedurals are generally more of a slow burn. You have them gathering information. It might be a little bit more analytical, sometimes a bit more cerebral. The action is there, but more slow moving. But with espionage and spy type films, they tend to be more exciting. You'll have like hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes you might have high-speed car chases. I love movies that jump from place to place. And you get a lot of that with this film here, where he visits, like over the course of the movie, several different, not necessarily exotic, but interesting locations. So the film starts off in London. It's then in, I don't remember exactly which, but like an African nation, right, during the foot chase. Then it's on to like Nassau, Bahamas. And then from there, much of the film is spent in Monaco. He later finds himself in Venice. And it's like all of these other locales in between. So it's like you have these really cool locations where he's like just globe hopping, which as someone that loves travel, it gives you an opportunity to get a glimpse into various locations around the world. And then it's like, also, he dresses pretty nicely for the most part. Like, his day-to-day stuff isn't all that great. You know, it looks alright. But like the tuxedos and whatnot, the women are dressed in nice gowns. I like movies like this. It's like, I mean, I think I dress okay, but I wouldn't say I'm like a fashion icon or anything along those lines. Like, I'm not into fashion, but I like nice clothes. And so it's like, I like to watch movies where you have people in like really nice tailored outfits. The looks they put together are very nice, like nice sharp clothes. So with all of that, this is just my kind of movie. And it's like, that combined with these interesting locations, they're driving nice cars, it just checks a lot of boxes for me. And so it's like, after that, the James Bond character, at least the Daniel Craig version, I thought it was actually pretty cool, right? Now, some of the other ones, granted, at the time of the times during which, you know, when they were making these movies back in the days, a lot of the, let's say, content and conversation might nowadays be considered cringy and inappropriate, sexist and whatnot, especially with their portrayal of women. But I like Daniel Craig. And so it's like, I guess taking what I've seen of him, especially in the years since from like other movies, when I watch James Bond, some of it is me liking Daniel Craig, like just being a fan of his. And so watching this movie, you know, he wears like these nice suits, he's driving these cool cars, he's visiting these exotic locations. Well, not exotic, but you know, it's not like Cleveland or something like that. You know, it's like cool places to visit. It makes for like a nice blend of classy and fancy at the same time. And then it's like you add to it that like James Bond is like this cool, suave guy. But part of it as well with the James Bond movies is the villain. In this case, the villain here is Le Chiffre. He doesn't even pop up until like a good way into the movie. It's like you end up with kind of like two different movies here within the one film where, you know, one part of the movie is him trying to figure out what's going on. There's this plot. He's trying to figure out about this bombing expert, what the target is, what they're trying to bomb. Turns out that like someone's trying to short the stock for a new airplane that's supposed to be launching. And, you know, he has to figure out the plot and upset their plans. And so that's like the early part of the film. And that's where like this foot race with this guy comes in. That gets worked out. He leaves there, heads to the Bahamas to get more information about what's going on. He's at this fancy ritzy resort where he meets like an underboss of sorts, right? He ends up at what I want to say is Miami. And there's like another chase. Not really like a high-speed chase, but exciting, you know, with this other guy now who's trying to plant a bomb. One of the things I like about James Bond movies is you'll have fight sequences over the course of the movie, but because of the variety of locations, they kind of switch it up. It's not just the same old every time he fights someone. It's like, if you think of like Mission Impossible, the first one, they kind of switch up the circumstances under which Ethan Hawke gets into these fights. So for example, they take like things that could be kind of repetitive and boring, they make it fresh by switching things up and putting them in new environments. So it's like with Ethan Hawke, he has to break into this secure room. He's fighting on the outside of a train. Here you have it where Bond is like fighting this guy in a truck. He has like a foot race with this Cirque du Soleil guy in Africa. And it just helps to mix things up. It helps to keep things interesting. There's this whole fight between, him trying to save the day and trying to stop this guy from planting this bomb. And all of that is like in this first part of the movie, right? Which is exciting on its own. But that then gives way to the main part of the film, where we're now introduced to the main villain, which is Le Chiffre. And Le Chiffre is like a really cool villain. We all have eyes, but the character is played by Mads Mikkelsen, right? I think that's the guy's name. And it's like he has this scar on his eye. And as a Bond villain, he can't just be like a regular bad guy, right? It's like these little details and touches that they add to make him more interesting. Where it's like he's got this eye, he's got a scar on the eye that makes him look like a villain. Like you see him and it's like, that's the bad guy right there. But then it's like he cries blood, or like his eye leaks blood. And it's like, how insane is that? That is like a super characteristic for a villain. It's like very creative. Just these little touches that they add that make the characters all the more interesting. So it's like, I like James Bond, but at the same time, like, I like Le Chiffre too. He's interesting. He's a cool villain. Like under pressure, he's lost all this money, which puts all this stuff into play. You got like all these other bad guys there. You got to do with the Cutlass. And it's like just a domino effect where Le Chiffre is now trying to get back these people's money. Bond is trying to catch him. You've got like these people on Le Chiffre's tail. Then they have a problem with Bond, and all of this stuff is taking place in Monaco, a nice ritzy location. It's a place where you can visit. It's like a playground for the rich and famous. So it's like, they're here in this high stakes poker game. When I was a kid, like one summer, I think it was like after the second or third grade, my cousins and I, we would gather at night to play poker. I don't know that we particularly knew how to play poker, but we were playing what we thought was poker. And I'm sure, we were missing some stuff and probably messing up some of the rules and whatnot. It's not the most exciting or interesting thing to watch, but given that it takes up a good part of the movie, had it just been Bond and these other people sitting around playing poker, it probably would have ended up being boring. But they managed to break it up by having like these little scenes where, you see Bond and Le Chiffre and the other characters interact. They take breaks and whatnot. They have interesting conversations. There's more fight sequences that help to break up what could have been like a really monotonous thing of them just playing poker. And it helps to keep the movie very exciting. Add to it that, the guys are like in tuxedos, the ladies are in gowns. All of this could have been very boring, but it ends up being very exciting and very enjoyable. It's like you get a sneak peek into what it might be like to visit Monaco, right? In between these breaks and whatnot, because they're not just like playing the game of poker straight through. They have these breaks where it gives an opportunity to kind of, check in with the different characters. You see Bond interact with some of the other characters, such as like Le Chiffre. You then have the Bond girl, who is Vesper Green, right? She's a beautiful woman, right? The actress is beautiful. And she plays like his love interest in the movie. And granted, they never make it really more than one movie. In this case, her name is Vesper Lynn, who's portrayed by Eva Green. And Vesper is like, for the Bond girl, she's actually pretty smart. She's a bit more complex, somewhat evenly matched with Bond, like figuring him out, shutting him down at points in the film, where it makes it feel like the two of them are on equal footing. Whereas quite often with the Bond girls, it's like they're really just there for eye candy. There's no nuance or complexity to them. But that's not the case here. Vesper is actually a pretty interesting character on her own. Like the character just hits all the right notes. The locations are perfect. The clothing and outfits are perfect. It's like, for me, it checks all the boxes. And then here you have this layer of complexity and interest. It's just sharp and smart in a way that I think some of the other Bond movies, the ones that I've seen, just are not. And so it's like with those different factors coming together, it creates a very exciting and enjoyable film. As a result, over the years, it's become like one of my favorite movies. It's a movie that by this point, obviously I know the storyline. You know, you watch it one through, the storyline isn't really that difficult to figure out. But it's a movie that I've watched over and over again, and I still find it enjoyable all these years later. And with that, I highly recommend it. And it's like, when it gets towards the end, the scenes in Venice, you know, it's like a different take on James Bond. You know, it's a more nuanced and complex James Bond, where you see him at the end of the film having successfully completed the mission. You know, he's looking to leave the spy life, to settle down. Things don't go according to plan. But it's like, it's interesting to see this change in character within him. And, you know, where things don't go according to plan, it does help to set up for the James Bond movies that would follow in the rest of the Daniel Craig series. And I will say that I like this one. I have seen the other Daniel Craig James Bonds, but I think that of the 4 films, I want to say I saw at least 3 of the 4 in theaters, right? I think the one after Casino Royale I didn't see in theaters, but the rest of them I did. But I have seen all 4 of them by this point. And the last one, which was like a farewell to Daniel Craig as James Bond, I saw that one in theaters. I was kind of excited for it because it was like at the end of COVID, the first year of COVID. But I didn't think it was all that good. You know, it might have been at the end of 2021, but it was still cool to get out and see that film. And I made sure to go to a nice theater so I could kick back and relax and everything. And while I don't think the other Daniel Craig James Bond movies were as good as Casino Royale still remains one of my absolute favorite movies, especially within the action genre.
Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.